We are joined now by one of the jurors who found Paul Manafort guilty last year in the case in which Paul Manafort was sentenced tonight. We are joined now by Paula Duncan. Paula Duncan, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I know this was short notice. I really appreciate it. We all remember you speaking about your jury deliberations after the conviction and talking about being a Trump voter and going into this hoping not to find what you found, which was that you found Paul Manafort guilty. And as I recall, Paula, you said you, for one, voted guilty on all 18 counts.
Yes, I did, Lawrence. And
that's true of the rest of the jurors except for one. That's what I reported you had said, and I'm pretty sure that's true.
That is correct.
Yeah. What is your reaction to the sentence tonight?
I think Mr. Manafort is going to have a rough 47 months in prison. I know his age is a factor in Judge Ellis's decision. I do think that's light compared to the guidelines. I do agree with that. But it's not over. And Mr. Manafort pleaded guilty, and next week will tell a different story, I'm assuming. So when you add the two together, Mr. Manafort is not going to get off as easy as some would like to believe.
And Paula, the one thing that surprised even the judge in the session today was the judge, even though he was giving him a lenient sentence, said that he was surprised that Paul Manafort did not apologize and did not express remorse for what he'd done. Is that something that, as a juror, having gone through all of this evidence, you would have liked to heard from Paul Manafort today?
Absolutely. I mean, the man, he broke the law, and no one is above the law. I said that before, and I'll say that again and again and again. No one. And he knows what he did, and he just doesn't seem remorseful. And I think that's a shame.
After you did your job as a juror, the president was asked about pardon, and he said that's not something he was thinking about and wanted to talk about then. What would be your reaction if the president pardoned Paul Manafort?
I support President Trump. He's our president. He was elected, and I think he's doing a good job. But I will be very disappointed in him if he does pardon Paul Manafort for Paul Manafort's crimes.
What would you say to the president about this? If the president, if you had a minute with him and he's saying, I'm thinking about pardoning him, you were in the case, you heard all the evidence, what do you think?
I would say, President Trump, that's a big mistake, or a huge mistake, as he would say. That would send a bad message to other people, and it would make President Trump look bad too. Paul Manafort needs to pay the price for what he did.
And the fact that the judge said that Paul Manafort lived an otherwise blameless life, even while he's waiting for sentencing in another case, literally next week in Washington, D.C., was that as surprising to hear from the judge today?
Judge Ellis, I know a lot of people are saying that Judge Ellis is too lenient and that he influenced the case. And I completely disagree, because we all but one would have charged Paul Manafort as guilty on all 18 counts. So Judge Ellis didn't influence our decision. He, however, does have the right to sentence as he sees fit, and that's what he did.
Would it surprise you, and I actually have no idea what the answer to this is, but would it surprise you if there was a survey of Judge Ellis's sentencing going back the last 20 years or so, and find that this is way out of line with what the judge has issued in similar cases, or even much less serious cases?
It would disappoint me, for sure.
And Paula, now that you're here, I just want to ask you just a couple more reactions about things you've learned about this world surrounding Paul Manafort, the Trump campaign. Michael Cohen was part of all of that, active in the campaign. He was a Republican Party official during the campaign. Just last week, he testified in court about the president, his longtime friend prior to testifying. What was your reaction to hearing Michael Cohen testify about the president last week?
Sad, and It makes me sad that our nation is so deeply divided. I voted for Trump. I will vote for Trump again because I do think he is doing some good things. That doesn't mean that I approve of everything President Trump does or says. I don't have to. I don't think there's any perfect person. And I just wish we could come together, let him finish his term, do the good that he can do, and get past this. The Russian collusion thing, when I voted, I don't know about you, Lawrence, but when I voted, there weren't any Russians at the polls. And I feel like Americans, like me, voted without any influence. And that's how Trump was elected. So, yeah, as far as Cohen, being friends with Trump and changing his tune, no one's all good. We're all bad. But it makes me sad to see this go on and on and on and affect our country in such a negative way.
Paula, let me just put you back in the juror's chair, hypothetically, just for a second, on Michael Cohen. Now, there was no jury because he pleaded guilty.
Right.
But one thing he pleaded guilty to was that Donald Trump directed him and conspired with him to commit campaign finance crimes in funneling payoff money to Stormy Daniels to keep her quiet. Michael Cohen testified about that under oath last week in the House of Representatives, laid that out very specifically, showed the checks with Donald Trump's signature on it, repaying Michael Cohen, he says, for the money he paid to Stormy Daniels. As a juror, as someone who sat in a courtroom and had to evaluate financial instruments and evidence like that in court, have to listen to witnesses, evaluate their credibility. Just as a juror listening to that piece from Michael Cohen about the payoffs with those exhibits, the checks, how did you process that?
As a juror, I would have to process that on just the facts. And if the checks were there and it could be proved that Trump funneled the money and did it, he would be guilty. It's a matter of right and wrong, yes and no, and that's how the judicial system works. And as a juror, you have to go by the facts and not just your feelings.
Paula Duncan, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it. And
Thank you, Lawrence.
And I hope you heard what the lawyers were saying about you before you joined us tonight. A lot of people are very impressed that when you raised your hand to take that oath to evaluate the facts in the Paul Manafort case and set aside any political biases or any biases you might bring into that courtroom, it is very clear to people listening to you that you did that you went in there as a Trump voter. A lot of people would think that's a biased juror. You took that oath and you followed that oath. That is very clear to all of us who've listened to you. And thank you, Paula, very much for joining us.
Thank you. It makes me proud to hear that.
Thank you. Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.